The past few articles have demonstrated total incompetence of Greek writers when it comes to their addiction to fables and mythological imperialism, which is subsequently imperialism of the historical chronological record. However, this may not be a technique of ancient Greeks, as I suspect that this problem arose in the Middle Ages, and Jacob Bryant did not suspect this yet, as far as I can tell. While he has unsavory claims to make about the Greeks, keep in mind that this distortion of the historical record could be a result of the Greco-Roman priesthoods post-Constantine, and as many learned priests and clergymen demonstrated, many of the texts depended on for history are forgeries, or at least partial forgeries. I arrived at my conclusions based on simple details, such as the father of history, Herodotus, and the father of scientific history, Thucydides, made no mention of Rome, despite existing in the 5th century BC, some 3 centuries after Rome's founding. No Greek or Roman writers make mention of the most important Etruscan cities, despite them being epicenters of the pottery, statue-making, metallurgy, and other significant trades that the Mediterranean was dependent on. I lay this out in the Spirit World series, as well as the Real Universal Empire. Jacob Bryant wrote, Annales. ANC Myth, pages 175-7. We must never deduce the etymology of an Egyptian or Oriental term from the Greek language. Eustathaias guel observes, I varvaron to onoma uchrielinikin etymologian aftu. The etymology of names are foreign to the Greek. We should recur to the Doric manner of expression as being nearest to the original. The Greeks adopted all foreign history and supposed it to have been of their own country. They mistook temples for deities and places for persons. They changed every foreign term to something similar in their own language, to something similar in sound, however remote in meaning, being led solely by the ear. They constantly mistook titles for names, and from these titles multiplied their deities and heroes. All terms of relation between the deities to be disregarded. As the Grecians were mistaken, it is worth our while to observe the mode of error and uniformity of mistake. By attending to this, we may bring things back to their primitive state and descry in ancient terms the original meaning. We must have regard to the oblique cases, especially in nouns in parasyllabic, when we have an antient term transmitted to us either from the Greeks or Romans. The nominative in both languages is often abridged, so that from the genitive of the word, or from the possessive, the original term is to be deduced. This will be found to obtain even in common names. From veterus we have veter for the true term, from sanguinis we have sanguine, and that this is right we may prove from Ennius, who says, O, pater, O, genitor, O, sanguine dies oriundum. O Father, O Creator, O Blood of the Gods. Ennii annals L2. Cum vito occubit Priamus sub Marte Pelasgo. Priam was of old age when he died fighting Pelasgo. IB L1. Pelasgo is the mythical ancestor of the Pelasgians, another name for the Etruscans according to Marsilius of Lesbos, cited by Dionysius of Halicarnassus. So mentis, and not mens, was the true nominative to mentis, meni, mentem, as we may learn from the same author. Istic est de sol sumptus ignis, isc mentis est, this is the price of the fire of the sun, and that of the mind. Apud ennii fragmenta. In like manner plebes was the nominative to plebe and plebum. Deficit alma series, nec plebes pain potiter. When the nourishment of Ceres wanes, the common people do not get bread. Lucilius. Ceres is another archetype for the sun in Virgo, and once winter comes, grains are not as abundant, so basically this translates, as the sun moves into winter, bread is not as available to common people. All the common departments of the deities are to be set aside as inconsistent and idle. Pollux will be found a judge, Ceres a lawgiver, Bacchus the god of the year, Neptune a physician, and Aesculapius the god of thunder, and this not merely from the poets, but from the best mythologists of the Grecians, from those who wrote professedly upon the subject. I have observed before that the Grecians in foreign words often change the new final to sigma. Forkeran, they wrote keras for kowan, kois, kous for athon, athos for baun, vus, vu, bus for sein, seis. He does not cite anything in the archaeological record to support these claims, specifically the cause or reason, but there are examples of this happening, i.e. Curon and Curus, Helion and Helios, etc. People of old were styled the children of the god, whom they worshipped. Hence they were at last thought to have been his real offspring, and he was looked up to as the true parent. On the contrary, priests were represented as foster fathers to the deity, before whom they ministered, and priestesses were styled Taiota Theta Nualphiota, or nurses. Colonies always went out under the patronage and title of some deity. This conducting god was in after times supposed to have been the real leader. Sometimes the whole merit of a transaction was imputed to this deity solely, who was represented under the character of Perseus, Dionysus, or Hercules. Hence, instead of one person we must put a people, and the history will be found consonant to the truth. As the Grecians made themselves principals in many great occurrences which were of another country, we must look abroad for the original, both of their rites and mythology, and apply to the nations from whence they were derived. Their original history was foreign, and engrafted upon the history of the country where they settled. This is of great consequence, and repeatedly to be considered. One great mistake too frequently prevails among people who deal in these researches, which must be carefully avoided. We should never make use of a language, which is modern or comparatively modern, to deduce the etymology of ancient and primitive terms. Pezrin applies to the modern Teutonic, which he styles the Celtic, and says was the language of Jupiter. But who is Jupiter, and what has the modern Celtic to do with the history of Egypt or Chaldea? There was an interval of 2,000 years between the times of which he treats and any history of the Celti, and there is still an interval not very much inferior to the former, before we arrive at the era of the language to which he applies. Bryant has put himself in a difficult position as far as I'm concerned, because he is not aware of the nature between the Celtic, Latin, and Sanskrit, which, if they are authentic languages, must descend from the same parent. I gave examples of the in the Holy Sailors. Even their numbers are essentially the same. C equals Celtic S equals Sanskrit R equals Roman. It is beyond demonstrable that Latin was a lingua franca between the ancient cultures of Italy, which, if you look at the alphabets and customs, are all derivative of the same culture, which, for lack of a better term, is called Etruscan by the Latins. Yet there is evidence that Rome was at least quasi-Etruscan all the way up to the 1st century BC, which may indicate that this historical farrago was designed to cover up Etruscan history and disguise it as Roman, on account that once one studies the Etruscan Empire, there is a greater likelihood that the Phoenicians are their navigators, and their language has no affinity to Indo-European, like Greek has, which debunks the entire narrative of Mosaic history, which Bryant is a proponent of. Bryant continued, IB, pages 178-9. It has been the custom of those writers, who have been versed in the Oriental languages, to deduce their etymologies from roots, which are often some portion of a verb. But the names of places and of persons are generally an assemblage of qualities and titles, such as I have exhibited in the treatise above, and I believe were never formed by such evolutions. The terms were obvious and in common use, taken from some well-known characteristics. Those who imposed such names never thought of a root, and probably did not know the purport of the term. Whoever therefore in etymology has recourse to this method of investigation seems to me to act like a person who should seek at the fountain head for a city which stood at the mouth of a river. The study of etymology, philology, religious symbolism, and even systemic errors, as noticed by Bryant, are a key to organizing the chronological record. Invest in my nonfiction work to learn these skill sets. Become a member to access the rest of this article.